Hi, how are you, Rupert?
I'm great, thanks. How you doing?
I'm doing well, but in northeast of the US, it's again rainy and cold, so I'm a little bummed. I hope it's a better weather in in UK.
We're getting four seasons in one day: rain and hail and sun, and it's roll on the arrival of spring. Although we had lovely 20-degree weather, Celsius over the weekend, so
Yes.
it varies. And welcome to our podcast, Unpacking Organizations, everyone, and another episode where we discuss our passion topics.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
So, Shradha, I believe we have a question from a listener.
Yes. So I was chatting with one of our listeners who really like our podcast. And one of the questions that came to us that they would like to hear about is that how does the level of work affect the hierarchies? You have spoken a lot about that in your book, Rupert, that how we define the role grids and the levels of the work. But actually, many a times we don't see it that they're wrong levels of work or it is manifesting wrong types of hierarchy. Where we see it manifested is in typical leadership and managerial behaviors. So we see a lot of micromanagement. We see a lot of compression between the roles. So people don't understand that who should they reporting into and what they can ask from their managers. The managers don't know enough about what people are working into because either they are far too removed or too close that they start to micromanage. So all of this starts to manifest as behaviors, leadership behaviors. Then we start to provide them the team effectiveness interventions, but actually there is more to it than just what we see through our eyes. Is that maybe there is a challenge around the role grids and the levels of the work. So how about we talk about that today, Rupert, because you have such an amazing big brains on that topic, and we would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Shradha. It's not really my brains, to be fair. A lot of this work was developed by a Canadian behavioral scientist and called Elliott Jacques. Hopefully, and he passed away, a little while ago. And what he
The
observed,
legend
and
for people like us in these topic, we all
that's
have
right,
read his books and
yeah.
swear by his work.
And what he looked at is when it comes to the work that people are doing, there is a time horizon. So it's what's the how much time do you have discretion over, and what is the cognitive complexity in terms of the processing that's required to do that work, and those two factors, work together. And he broke it into a series of levels. It's called the stratified system, and the first level, level one, it's really minute to minute. The way it was explained to me that I quite like is you're a shop assistant, and someone walks into the shop, it's a retail environment, and you help that customer buy something. So you might give some advice and what have you, and you support them, and when you've finished the work, the job's done and it's over. And so that's, it's simple work. It's the time discretion is can be measured in hours and days, and 40% of people that are in the workplace, something like 40% are kind of at that level. Then level two, you think about is could be the store manager or a team leader role, and they're thinking 3 months into the future. And I won't go through all the levels, and we're going to bring on a guest called Otto Pretorius, and I think we can go into more detail behind the science and everything behind it with him. But basically, you have these different levels, and at the other extreme, you have people who transform industries. So Steve Jobs, who's changing an industry, or Elon Musk, who's changing an industry, they're like a level 8. and their time horizon is something like 50 years into the future, and they transform, like they create industries and transform how they think about the world. And very, very few people are level eights. It's sort of only a few people sort of per generation. The CEO of a big multinational, so think Shell or Unilever or Bank of America, Apple for that matter, Google, they're a level 7. So Tim Cook, who is at Apple, is a 7 because he's running the process, and they sort of think 20-ish years into the future. And so there are these different levels now in the science, that if someone is of the same, you have a role level, the level that a role is defined at, and then you have the role that a human being, a person's at. And based on your ability, cognitive processing and dealing with things like the ambiguity and meta models and information and what have you. And if you're at, say, level 4 and you're managing someone at level 4, the person you're managing is going to feel micromanaged, and they're going to feel claustrophobic, and they're going to feel like they're trying to do the job and they're not adding sufficient value to the work that you're doing from that relationship. And well over 40% of roles actually are defined at the same level, they're built at the same level. And so that's where you have so much micromanagement, and you can see that from a structure perspective, you have too many layers.
And
So
just to
imagine,
clarify for our listeners, these levels are not the levels of pay grades or job bands. We're talking about the levels
correct,
of work, of how the work gets defined distinctly based on the complexity and the time horizon that the work should be doing. And therefore, Rupert, what you're saying is that based on that level of the work, there could be multiple pay grades, job bands, and the hierarchies in the organization that fall within the same level. And therefore, that challenge happens. Yes. I just wanted
totally.
to clarify.
I think it's a great clarification, because the pay is also driven by market forces.
That's right.
So, if you're in software development, the pay is going to be higher for the same sort of, Elliott Jacques level of work than someone who's in, say, comms or branding.
Exactly.
So, it's a supply and demand of resource, etc., that drives this. People in commercial roles who are selling, they can be quite a low level but earn lots of money because their skill set, it's not the time horizon into the future, but they bring such value in their ability to sell that they get rewarded as such. So pay is a different topic. The grading as well often has to do with the span of control. You can have someone who's at, say, a level 4, who has no one reporting to them. So think, your legal counsel. Geez, I know lots of people who are level 4s who have no one reporting to them, and you can have someone at level 3 who has a huge number of people reporting to them. So you
Yep.
could have a regional
Operations
manager.
leaders,
That's
operation,
right,
yes,
regional
operation
manager with
managers. Yep.
lots of store managers, and then all the people in the store. So
Yep.
there is, and earning a lot more than, say, the person that's at level. So it's a very, very good point. And from an org design, there's an implication of compression, which we talked about. But there's also an implication if the gap is too great. So if you've got a level 2 reporting into a level 4, the person at level 2 is going to be overwhelmed and confused by the person at level 4 because their meta models, the way they're thinking, the time, it's too different. The level of ambiguity to the person that's level 2 will just be too great. And so that is an issue for both people. So it's a really helpful lens. I would say that there are sometimes, I've observed practitioners who drink the Kool-Aid maybe a little bit too much, and everything's totally literal, and it's a scientific approach, but let's learn the science, and you have to, to be trained. There are people who are trained in interviewing you to understand what level you were at and all these other things. And, you have to be pretty sophisticated to be able to do that. I know the signs, but I'm not trained. I'm not qualified to do it.
That's a
So
great
I
point as well, Rupert, because I feel that many a times these things taken very literally actually end up creating more harm than help, because then you are just following a very dogmatic way of thinking about it and trying to
yeah
just fit it into the context. The other highlight that I would say is that I was helping one of the organizations, which is a service organization, and thinking about their levels in job architecture. And this is the question that I asked, that at what level people start to think beyond certain time horizon, because they're very much as in service industry. So everything is tracked at an hourly or sometimes even half an hourly basis. And it was very eye opening for everybody to think about that until their very senior levels, everybody's thinking about hourly P&L, because it was so dependent on that particular, like, if you don't meet that P&L in that hour, it's lost. So it was it is important for us to know that for many times, for in an organization, it's important to understand that at what seniority you start thinking as a higher or a longer time horizon, because otherwise you're just trying to run on that treadmill for the organization and nobody's helping them grow forward or thinking into building long-term capabilities. And there's no process improvement because nobody's thinking in the longer term duration. And it's important to think that levels of work from that perspective as well, that where is that insight is coming in, which kind of roles are driving those kind of complexity in the organization.
yeah yeah it's very, the strategic processes,
Right,
it,
right.
identifying the unseen opportunities that others don't see, and connecting dots that others can't connect.
Yes,
um, so I think from an org design practitioner's perspective, it's imperative to understand the level of work. I think it's imperative to have a role grid. I'm amazed at how few organizations actually even have role grids. Um, and the grid is the stratified system. The levels. Think of them as the rows, and then the columns are job families. So think of functional job families, sub functions, etc. And then the dots inside, in that, I think of it as a cross tab. So in between that are the different roles. And that also helps, by the way, with job family career path planning. And what you can do is you can go up a within one column, say, but you can also go up and then across and into other ones. So it really helps people to understand that and to plan their careers. And but it's an input to helping you structure for pay and for job family architecture, but it's not the same thing, and you need both.
yes.
Really
And I
good point.
think one more thing is that understanding that not all the job families start from the bottom up and go all the way up to the top.
Very good point.
I think that is also sometimes we pressure ourselves to say that, oh, the job families should fill in the entire layer or the level of the work, but that's not true. It depends upon the nature of the job, it depends upon the context of the organization, and they can be stacked in different levels across. So that's
It's a
another
very
thing which feel
it's a very good point. Not all job families have a level one.
exactly,
And a
exactly.
lot don't go up beyond. A lot don't go to level four. Quite a few
Yes,
don't go to five. And when you start moving to five, you start moving more into general management anyway.
right,
So by definition, the sort of functional lens becomes less critical.
absolutely.
So,
So
well, hopefully that answers the question.
yes, it did. It did beautifully. So thank you so much, Rupert. Before we wrap up, what is one takeaway that you want to have our listeners from this episode?
I think it's not the same as pay, which is the point you made.
Mm.
I think that's critical. And actually, if I can put a little bonus one in, don't try and think you have to fill in the whole grid, which is your other point, Shradha. I think those are really nice practical points for people to bear in mind. And
Thank you,
yours?
Rupert. And mine would be that whenever we are thinking about these um, job architecture or the layers in the organization, think about the level of work. We usually stop that, we have one, two, three, four layers in the organizations, which is the reporting hierarchy. But we need to think one more step into it and say that where the levels of work are getting differentiated. You might think about that there are 8 layers in the organizations, which is across the hierarchy, but they all fall in first 3 levels of work. And that understanding is important, because then you start understanding that which of those layers are getting more compressed in the organization. It's something which is a very practical tension. You cannot erase it, but then once you identify it, then maybe we can solve it and manage it. So that's what is my takeaway.
Great. Well, I
Thank
hope
you,
everyone found
everybody.
this one useful. Yeah, no, thanks so much,
Yes.
Shradha.
Thank you, Rupert. Until next time. Bye now.
Until next. Bye.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.